The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a production of Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass. It's a weekly discussion of public policy issues facing our viewing area. This week, how a workforce issue is affecting churches. What happens when a church has trouble finding clergy to lead worship services? It's a problem that can face a lot of denominations in rural areas, and we will meet with some church leaders to see how communities are affected and what they are doing about it. First, the story of how one denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, is working with local organizations to help rural churches. The goal is to get some seminary students engaged in understanding rural life. Here's Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser with more.
Many churches in our region are struggling to fill their congregation. Not only fill their congregation, they're struggling to find somebody to lead them. Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Hills, Minnesota is one of those congregations that went an entire year before they found somebody to lead their Sunday service. Here's their story of how they found the right woman for the job.
Well, when we started the call and the interview process, we were given 3 candidates to choose from. And of those, we did interview one of the candidates, and the interview went well. It was just that at that time we felt that it wasn't a good fit for our congregation. So at that time, our group prayed for patience, and because we had such a supportive interim pastor, we had the luxury of taking our time, and he told us to take as much time as we wanted. It was our job to pick out the right candidate, and he was sure that we would come up with a good candidate.
That was when a candidate's bio crossed their church desk that made them look twice. A young woman out of Iowa was answering their call.
So after the long dry spell with no new candidates, we received a letter from Pastor Maggie, and the committee was very impressed. The things that impressed us was when we set up the interview, before we started, she had a prayer, she read from Scripture, and then she said, you know, everybody just take a deep breath, relax, there's no pressure. And I thought, I should be the one telling you this, and you're telling me. And then after we were sitting there, and everything was just dead quiet. Everyone was just in deep thought. And I looked to the person next to me and I said, I just love this girl. And everyone just erupted at the same time. They all agreed. They were so excited. They felt the presence and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. It was just an awesome experience. Everybody, it was just a unanimous, this is the girl we want.
Maggie was a recent ministry graduate in search of her own perfect congregation. Despite being young, she knew what she was looking for as a pastor, and knew that when the call was right for her, her age would not be an issue.
It's challenging to get people to see beyond the young face. And one of the things is being put in the box of people see you and they see a young person. And they think, oh, you know, you're young, you must be good with the youth. You know, how about you do our youth ministry? But we're trained to work with all ages and to do everything when it comes to the ministry of a church. And one of the things really that stood out to me about Bethlehem, when I was interviewing, I had 3 different interviews, and Bethlehem was the only one that didn't mention how young I was. So they didn't just see me as young energy, or, oh good, you know, she'll attract young people, which can be true, but certainly we're not magic magnets. So it was good to be seen and recognized and respected for the experience I did have.
Where Bethlehem Lutheran Church waited to find somebody who would accept their town of Hills, Minnesota, for all its small town charm, not all towns are successful in that wait.
The first question they asked me in the interview was, why do you want to come here? And perhaps I'm reading into it, but I hear it's common for small town and rural ministry settings where they come with the challenge of low self-esteem. They think, why would a pastor want to come here? I think it's also a misunderstanding about pastors want their goal church is a big church with 1,000+ members and all these programs and big staff. And that could be certainly true for some people, but that wasn't what I was looking for. I think small church has many benefits. It certainly has its challenges. There aren't necessarily as many resources. You have to rely heavily on volunteers. We don't have a lot of paid staff. But at the same time, when you have a small church, it's based on families and these relationships, and you can really build deeper connections and more authentic relationships. And the vibrancy of a church just has nothing to do with the size. You can have a small church that is very vibrant in its love of God and its ability to incorporate their faith into their daily life, into their family life. And so small church was really where I wanted to be.
And with us now to discuss the shortages in clergy, we have folks from the Presbyterian Church and the Roman Catholic Church. We have with us today, we have Presbyter Rick Karras, and he's, I should say, transitional presbyter, Rick Karras, and also Father Steve Verelst, and they join us both from Willmar, Minnesota today. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So often we hear about worker shortages and shortages of employment, and we hear about welders or physics teachers, and we don't often hear about clergy. But clearly, you know, it's an issue that the people may not understand that much about. So, Rick, I'd like to start with you and your role. You know, what does this really mean for rural areas, the shortage of clergy?
It means that churches are going to have to think outside of the box to look at ways that they can either work with other congregations or work with other denominations or even raise up leadership from within their own ranks to assume pastoral roles in the church. Churches are getting smaller, communities are getting smaller, and getting people to come to rural Minnesota is not always an easy task.
It's the issue of, you know, so in that way it's like recruiting for many other positions. It's where are they when they come out of school and have training, and where do they want to be? And Father Steve, for you, the same?
Well, the immediate effect that it's having on our congregations is, of course, they don't have the regular service times that they're accustomed to. So instead of having 2 or 3 services on a particular Sunday, they might be down to 1. Some congregations, of course, are experiencing not even having a service every Sunday, but maybe every other Sunday or periodically and stuff like that. So, but long term, it does, as was mentioned, a need for restructuring, understanding church in a different way. What does that mean for us to be able to gather together as a community with a different understanding of leadership, that if we don't have the clergy there, how do the laity come forward to be able to extend that leadership?
It strikes me when you talk about not having a service every Sunday that we're really seeing history repeat itself here, aren't we?
Yes.
Because, of course, if you look at the beginning of congregations, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, as many of our rural areas were settled, they had multi-point congregations and didn't have services every Sunday, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we actually called them back then mission churches. So there would be a clergy person that would be stationed in a particular town or community, and then he would venture out, usually on horseback, and he would go to the various nearby villages and to be able to preside at a liturgy there, at a service at that time. So sometimes only getting there once every month, every couple of months. So.
So, and it strikes me though that also as you look at this, there's a lot of creativity that ends up being involved because you've got a set of structures about how churches have been, but now you have to look at how are congregations coming together and serving. So it's sort of a creative problem-solving method. Rick?
It's not only creative, but it involves partners across denominational lines. Living in this part of Minnesota, we Presbyterians are not a large number of people. Our Lutheran brothers and sisters outnumber us greatly, and so many times in trying to be creative, we turn to partnerships with the Lutherans and also with the Methodists and other people. And so the creative problem solving involves partners not only across denominational lines, but in a couple situations right now that we're looking at across state lines. We go where we can find the people to work with us.
And it also strikes me, though, when you talk about keeping creative and taking creative problem solving, there is, again, using the worker shortage analogy, there is the idea of recruiting, and then there's also retaining. So do we see challenges with retaining pastors? Because I would think that clergy might face higher burnout if the demands have changed for them. Is that also a concern, Father Steve?
It certainly is. I mean, it's different for us in the Catholic Church, of course, because how the clergy is structured and how it works, and in terms of its assignments, is a little bit different. But certainly in terms of recruitment, we realize that we have smaller families. So, I'm the youngest of 10 children. We don't see that common much anymore, if at all. So now when you only have 2 children to a family, and especially in the Catholic Church, with the priests being called to a life of celibacy, so then there's the question of, do we really want our one and only son to become a priest, and what happens to the family name? And so there's all those concerns that obviously parents would have. And so that's part of our, recruitment in terms of being able to talk to parents and young people about, how this vocation is indeed satisfying and is a great way to be able to live out one's calling. So,
well, when we think about retaining people, part of what I was thinking of there is that it's about retaining people within the life of the church for a lot of these congregations, or retaining the families, or retaining those broader, or family units within churches, because that seems to be also a significant concern, and which gets to the question of generational issues, doesn't it, Rick?
Definitely. As our communities shrink, as it takes fewer people to do more on a larger plot of ground out in the farms and the ranches, a lot of the young people leave this part of Minnesota and other parts of the Midwest to go to the bigger cities, and so they're not even coming back to communities where they grew up. So we're not only having trouble retaining clergy in the churches, our communities are having trouble retaining their young people because the opportunities just aren't there. So there's that issue that's working on the congregations.
Sure, and then also, you look at within different generations where you have a group of a percentage of church-going people within one generation or another generation or another generation. And so how do those transitions happen, which I'm sure is another significant challenge that churches seem to be facing, because even if the entire population is dropping, that's one thing. But then if the church-going percentage within that is dropping, that presents another set of challenges, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, it's the whole sense of what do we mean by community. And obviously that definition of community is different with the generations as well. So, for the older population, community is where people come together, where they gather in a specific place to worship God on a Sunday morning. For the younger generations, community is found in utilizing technology. So they will, as part of their spirituality or their experience of worship, their experience of community, they'll go to technology, YouTube, being able to access those different ways in which they then experience community in the sense of belonging and coming together, and what spirituality means for them through those means of technology. So.
It also strikes me that when you look at churches and community, that what many people sometimes overlook is the commonalities between inner city urban congregations and rural congregations. Because I've talked to inner city urban congregation leaders who say, well, we have a high percentage of our population that's elderly in the church, and we have new neighbors and not as many neighbors and not as many families or large families. And so they're facing some of the same challenges. Have you found that in discussions with other church leaders, either one of you, that you're seeing those same kind of commonalities?
It's you know, what Father Steve said about the technology, but also there's just all the other busyness that is put into people's schedule, and the church is just one of many options now, whether it's in a rural community or an urban community. And obviously in the urban setting, all of those opportunities are multiplied. And so whether it's sports, whether it's just going down and hanging out at the Starbucks on a Sunday, community is found in a lot of other places. And it does provide a challenge, whether it's urban or rural. Also, as congregations get older and smaller, the big issue becomes finances.
Sure.
The finances to stay open, the finances to pay for the leadership.
Yeah, particularly if you're looking at, let's say structures, or whether they be physical structures or organizational structures that maybe have designed for a certain number of people. As you get to half that many people, how do you maintain the infrastructure, right?
Yeah. And it's, we have often said that we have, in the Diocese of New Ulm, of which I'm a priest, we have 75 parishes, 37 active clergy serving those 75. But we said even if we had 75 active clergy, many of our parishes, congregations, would be unable to financially keep the building as well as the clergy supported because of the dwindling numbers and finances and those challenges that exist in our rural society. So I think the other challenge that is equivalent with the inner city is the diversity that we're experiencing in many of our rural communities. So because we have an influx now of migrants, immigrants from other countries, especially in Willmar, we see that with our Hispanic community, the Somalian community, and so that in and of itself also challenges our understanding of community, and how do we then open the doors to include those that have not been part of our experience in the past.
And it strikes me there again, we may have a little bit of history repeating itself, because people who look at the history of our communities will know that in these communities there was a church where only German was spoken on Sundays and only Norwegian was spoken or only Swedish, and now we're seeing with a very different group of people. But again, you have these distinct cultural differences that we may have forgotten about, but now we're seeing them in very different ways.
Right.
Yeah, particularly in Willmar, which has so many different communities in many other ways as well. What about the preparation of people who are going into the clergy? I know that that's one of the things that people may not think about, but there are people who may have an interest in saying, oh, well, there's a need here, but what does it take to really study? And that's the many years of study. And how do people get through that process if they want to address the shortage? So I'll just talk about the requirements there. Rick?
In the Presbyterian Church, we have 10 or 11 theological institutions spread around the country, and after people get their college degrees, then they enter into seminary, and it's usually a 3-year process. Some seminaries do an internship, so it becomes a 4-year process. One of the things we are finding is I am one of the relatively few who went straight from college into seminary and was in a church by the time I was 25. More and more of the people going to seminaries in the Presbyterian Church USA are second career, and many of them have been in a previous career 10 or 12 years or more, and then sense a call to ministry, and then go into the seminaries. And one of the things that's really a critical part then is when they go to the seminary, many of them, even if they go later, are still perhaps carrying some college debt. But seminary educations are rather expensive, and there are so many students coming out with significant seminary debt now. And part of the reason we don't attract them to small rural congregations in Minnesota is the salaries aren't there for them to be able to pay off the debts. So we do have willing clergy. They just don't come to the places where we need because of the financial aspect of it. And it's a challenge.
So there are barriers and challenges as people, even if they recognize a need and they're interested, it seems like it would be quite a process for them to go from their initial thought of it to completing the education. True?
Yes, yeah. And in the Catholic Church, we follow a similar process, as Rick mentioned. After one gets one's college degree, then you enter into the seminary. It's a 3-year to get one's Master of Divinity degree, but usually it's a 4-year process because there's an internship, a pastoral internship that's a part of that experience. So after 4 years post-college graduation, then one is ordained. And then after that, one is brought into an internship as an associate. We refer to that as an associate pastor before one becomes a pastor. But we're finding that, again, because of our shortage of clergy, that you're not an apprentice or an associate very long. So you usually have 2 years to get up to speed and 3 years usually at the most, and then you're made a pastor. So.
Sure. As is in the case of many other fields, you find yourself pressed into service faster than you might have thought.
Yeah.
And I think this, from what I understand, this has also had an effect on where people may learn, because I know that there are some seminaries that have merged or seminaries that have closed because if there aren't as many students there in the first place, it's tougher to maintain that infrastructure, and so that changes the dynamics as well, I understand.
That is true. In our Presbyterian tradition, right now, the seminaries are still standing fairly separate. Each one of them is trying to identify what they do well. The seminary I attended in Louisville, Kentucky, one of the things they're focusing on and trying to address this debt issue is they have received a significant endowment and are now trying to create tuition-free, basically even expense-free education so that students can come out and might be open to considering opportunities where the pay isn't going to be as great because they're not going to carry that debt. But that's something that's just beginning to take shape now. Other seminaries need to think about that across denominational lines and things. But we're also noticing that there is a declining enrollment. I was just on campus a few weeks ago, and I noticed a larger number of vacant student apartments than when I was there 40 years ago.
And I found it interesting too when I've talked to people about within their communities. They say that they often had a friend they went to school with who decided that was the right path for them, and they went right after high school, college, and they knew they were going there. And now, if you're seeing people as a second or third path, if they have the student loan debt, if they have those other things, the barriers can be quite large for them. And so I wonder, is this in some cases about letting people know that there are these opportunities for them in those fields and that there's a demand? Does it strike you that people understand that the shortage is there? A lot of the people you work with?
Well, certainly for us, yes. I mean, whether it's parishioners or certainly people that are working within the church are very much aware of the demands and that sort of thing. And we're always making it clear in our congregations of the need for more priests. And so we keep inviting people to pray for priests, but also to invite young people, as well as Rick mentioned, second and third career individuals that people might see possess those gifts or that calling to the priesthood, to be able to consider that call and hopefully to answer affirmatively in that sense. So,
one of the things I was thinking about here is that if people have an interest in this, as we go into the last 2-3 minutes of the show here, how do people start to find out more about within their own church, or if they know someone that they think might have an interest? What are the sort of structures or advice that you would have for folks who might have that interest?
To our Presbyterian friends, I normally say, if you're feeling a call or you sense that there's somebody who would make a good pastor or pastoral leader, to begin by talking with their pastors. But in our system, we have a structure at our presbytery level where we talk with and help nurture people who are considering a call, and they can go through a phase of inquiry, a phase of candidacy, to help them do some of that discernment. Our seminaries have some good programs where they have invited students, particularly high school and college age young people, to come to the seminary for a week or two during a summer to help get a sense about what seminary education is about, but also to do some of the discernment work that is part of that. So for me, the beginning point is for people to talk with the pastors of their churches or local pastors within the community to find out what's the best place to start.
Yeah, and so to find out, for someone they're talking to, what path worked for you? Would that path work for me? How did you go there? Closing thoughts on that, Father Steve?
The same would be true for us in the Catholic Church. We would encourage people just to contact their local pastor, priest, who can certainly refer them, share their own kind of journey and the path that they took. But we also have a diocesan website people can go to, www.dnu.org. Click on vocations, and they'll have lots of information there that they can access to be able to find out. Again, we have similar experiences where we have live-in weekends where young men can go to the seminary to experience what that is like and to be able to see for themselves whether or not that might be a calling for them.
Well, it's been fascinating to discuss this issue of the shortages with both of you, Father Steve Verhelst and Rick Karras from the Presbyterian Church. Thank you both for joining us on Compass.
You're welcome.
That's it for this week on Compass. Join us next week for more people, places, and issues facing our region. Thanks.